Hi class and welcome to week 12. This week we'll be discussing motivational learning theories, or theories designed to provide you with strategies to motivate unmotivated students in class. Specifically, we'll be talking about influences on motivation, two different kinds of motivation, intrinsic versus extrinsic, and several theories, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, expectancy value theory, attribution theory, and goal theory. It's important that you understand these theories and their strategies because this will be something required on your certification exams. As always, the vocabulary in the chapter is presented. Again, this is in the syllabus if you need to have the specific list in front of you. So what is motivation? Well, Dear Brophy in 1987, he's a theorist in education, said motivation to learn is acquired through general experience, but stimulated most directly through modeling, communication of expectations, and direct instruction or socialization by significant others, especially parents and teachers. And what this definition speaks to is the idea that many different influences play a role in whether or not a student is motivated in your classroom. At first, infants and young children appear to be propelled by curiosity, driven by an intense need to explore, interact with, and make sense of their environment. But over time, unfortunately, their passion for learning frequently seems to shrink. Learning often becomes associated with drudgery instead of delight. A large number of students, more than 1 in 4, leave school before graduating. Many more are physically present in the classroom but largely mentally absent. They fail to invest themselves fully in the experience of learning. So let's talk about some of the motivating influences. I think it begins at home because we know that children's home environment shapes their ideas about learning. If you think about it, children who are raised in a home that is warm and nurturing usually grow up to become more self-confident about themselves. They have greater autonomy, independence. They have greater self-efficacy or belief that they can do things. The student himself has beliefs about learning, and this is called a mindset, when they have internal beliefs about their own successes and failures. So I am good at math, I am not good at math comes into play, or perhaps they say that teacher just hates me, so I'm never going to be able to get ahead. So lots of different things come into play and form a mindset that the students have about learning, which in turn influences their motivation. School, of course, plays a large role. Once children start school, they begin forming beliefs about their school-related successes and failures, and we know it happens very early. Children start to divide themselves into groups as competent in school or not competent in school. Sometimes they look for people to blame, or they look for reasons why they're being successful or not. And so we say they attribute their successes and failures. And how they attribute these successes and failures has a lot to do with their motivation. We're going to get into that in a bit when we discuss attribution theory. The teacher has a role to play in how students are motivated. The beliefs that teachers themselves have about teaching and learning, and the nature of the expectations they hold for students also exert a powerful influence. Specifically, when teachers don't believe that students are capable of learning, we know that students are unmotivated. To a very large degree, students expect to learn if their teachers expect them to learn. Two types of motivation that we need to talk about are intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is when students have a desire to engage in activities because those activities are pleasurable and regardless of external rewards or contingencies. So intrinsic motivation is fueled by intrinsic incentives or activities that are pleasurable because of the task itself. So some examples of intrinsic motivation, activities that are generated by intrinsic motivation. When young children reach out and grab an object, turn it over and push it away in an effort to control it. So that, think of a baby just learning to crawl. The baby wants to reach the object, so he's motivated to crawl. He doesn't crawl because somebody rewards him. A 4-year-old who asks a lot of questions does so, wants to learn because learning is inherently pleasurable. So we say the child is intrinsically motivated to learn. Children playing computer games, it's interesting to me as a teacher that a child that won't do his homework will play computer games. Excuse me. And sometimes those computer games require learning, but they're intrinsically pleasurable. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, the rewards are not task-oriented. They're fueled by extrinsic incentives, usually rewards, something external to the task itself. Expected tangible rewards offered to students for simply doing a task diminishes intrinsic motivation. So the point of this is the more you use extrinsic rewards, we'll see examples what they are in a second, that diminishes students' desire to do the task for the task itself. So examples of these, and we've all done them, we've all used them. Pizza party for good classroom behavior, extra allowance for a good report card. These are all extrinsic motivators because they're not the pleasure of doing the task itself. Sometimes they're fun and they're good to use sparingly, but an over-reliance on these external rewards or extrinsic motivators can actually make it harder for students to focus on the pleasure of learning. So what are the instructional implications of this? Well, can we foster intrinsic motivation regardless of age? And the answer is nicely yes. You need to create interesting lessons that focus on interesting activities. And I would talk to my students about how much enjoyment, how much fun doing this is, and show excitement and engagement in the activity. So for example, look here under this microscope, student, you can see the paramecium moving, and get excited about what they're seeing and learning. It's good to offer students choice at times in a way that does not focus on obtaining extrinsic rewards. So for example, you can say, okay, for this unit, you can either do a poster or you can do a PowerPoint. Students like having a choice, and that can be very intrinsically rewarding. And finally, make learning meaningful and relevant. You've heard the students complain often enough, when am I ever going to use this? Well, show them how they're going to use them, or show them why it's connected to their lives. Show them why it's important to learn, and then they're much more likely to be intrinsically motivated. So now that we've discussed intrinsic versus extrinsic reward, we'll turn to the first of several learning theories about motivation, and that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you see in front of you a pyramid, and this pyramid is divided into levels, and the labels are on the side. So at the very bottom, if you count the levels from the bottom to the top, you'll see that there are 5 levels. And you'll see that the first 4 levels are what are we called, from the bottom to the top, are what are called deficiency needs. So the top level is what we call a growth needs. And these are needs that everyone has, not just students, but we're going to focus on students. The most basic level at the bottom is a physiological need. So students need to breathe, they need food, they need water. As adults, they grow up and they need sex and they need sleeps. etc. And these needs must be met before the needs at the next level can be met. The next level is safety. So people need to feel secure. They need to have employment so they can have shelter, etc. And so these are like a second level up. These needs must be met before the next level, love and belonging. So friendship, family, sexual intimacy. These three needs levels need to be met before students can develop a sense of self-esteem, confidence, achievement, and respect by others. The, the last level, the highest level, is called self-actualization. So this is kind of becoming the best person that you can be. And at this level, people focus on morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, and acceptance of facts. And what Maslow said is all of those bottom levels must be satisfied before students can be self-actualized at the top level. So if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. If a student is struggling at home because they're about to be kicked out with their parents of their apartment, if they don't have enough food to eat, if they don't feel secure, maybe they're in a dangerous area, it's going to be very hard for that student to progress and develop a sense of self-esteem or confidence or achievement, much less develop the top level. And so this really has a huge impact on motivation. As I said, Maslow discussed self-actualization, or the desire to become everything that one is capable of becoming, that top level. While deficiency needs must be met, growth needs are the need for personal growth. However, the higher needs in this hierarchy only come into focus once all the needs that are lower down are mainly or entirely satisfied. This is a poignant caption for this picture. In teaching, you can't do the Bloom stuff until you take care of the Maslow stuff, by Alan Beck. So Bloom, if you remember, focused on different kinds of Bloom's taxonomy, different kinds of levels of questioning, and remember that whole creativity is higher than knowledge and comprehension. Well, what Maslow said is, well, that's great, but if a student is hungry, if a student is insecure because of safety issues, you can't focus on any of that. So what determines a student's achievement motivation? In other words, a motivation to achieve. One of the first major theories we're going to discuss is called the expectancy value theory, or sometimes just the expectancy theory. And this was put forth by a researcher originally named Atkinson way back in 1957. And he theorized that there were two important components to students' motivation: expectancy for success, or whether a person expects to succeed in something. So what's the probability that they'll be successful? And the value of the task. So what does the task offer the individual? And this makes sense as well, because if you think about it, suppose I wanted a car and I wanted to buy a car, and I really, really need a car to get to work, and I value a car because I can go on trips, and I have a high value, um, but I have to save a lot of money. So what's my expectancy for success at that? You know, how long will it take me to save money? Maybe it'll take me 20 years to save up enough money to buy a car. And so with a low expectancy for success, but a high value, maybe I don't have much motivation. But what if I could change it so in 4 or 5 years I could save up the money? And that's a lot. I would see my expectancy of being successful would really go up. And so I might be much more motivated to do that. On the other hand, suppose someone asked me to do a task um, such as washing the car that I buy. Well, I might see that value as being low. Yeah, it might be nice to have a clean car, but it's a beautiful spring day and the sun is warm and it's shining, and I want to go out with my dog for a hike. I'm probably not going to value that task, even though I could reasonably expect to be successful at that task if I chose to, I'm probably not going to value it as much. So, in order to be highly motivated, both of these things have to be in place. So, what shapes our expectancy of success? Well, several things. Self-concept, for example, such as an individual's perception of their ability in a specific domain. Students, you've probably heard many students, and you may say yourself, I'm no good at math. And so you have a poor self-concept about yourself in math. And that would tend to lower your motivation to do something well. Task difficulty, how difficult do you see the task? Is it achievable? Getting back to my example of expectancy of success, saving money over 20 years, I might see as very, very difficult and non achievable. And so that's why that expectancy of success is low. So these two things shape our expectancy of success. What causes something to have value to an individual? Well, they feel that it's important to do well. Maybe they find that the task is interesting, or maybe it's relative to their future goals. So, getting back to my car example, maybe I valued that task greatly because it was important to my future goals of getting to work or getting a better job, for example. Some researchers, Adkels, Wickfield, and Tant, believe that many of these perceptions regarding expectancy and value are shaped by the environment. So, as teachers, we can shape how our students perceive tasks, the value of the task, and whether they expect to succeed. And that's an important idea to note because if these were just inborn, there'd be no point about talking about them. But they're not. We can shape students' expectations and perceptions of tasks. So, how can we do that? What are the instructional implications of the expectancy value theory? Well, the idea is we need to encourage children to attempt difficult but realistic tasks. So we don't want the task to be so easy that the student loses interest. Students may also lose respect for the teacher if the task is too easy. So what you want to do is you want to set the task challenge a little bit difficult for the student, but achievable. If it's too difficult, they're not going to have an expectancy for success. And this kind of gets back to the zone of proximal development that Vygotsky put forth. You want it a little bit challenging, but not way over their heads. You're also going to reward and praise the child for progress when success is achieved. Again, rewards can be intrinsic motivators. Look how engaging that task was, you could say to the students. Praise the child based on their progress. So again, not you're so good at math, but look at what you've accomplished to date. Don't complain or punish when the child fails, but encourage the child to try again, to try another method. Some additional expectancy value theories are that students must engage in work that is meaningful, but gauge to their developmental level so as to reduce the fear of failure. So if students see the work or the teachings of the teacher is meaningless, they're less likely to be motivated to try in the class or do well. The task must not be too easy, and repeated success builds the perception of confidence. So over and over again, pointing out students' successes tends to help them develop this idea that they can expect to succeed. In turn, this leads to greater self-efficacy or the belief that you can do something, and that increases the likelihood of a student choosing to move on to more difficult tasks. You can modify the environment. The environment must be positive with regard to education and point to the value of each educational domain. Let's talk for a moment about attribution theory. This is a different theory. And it has to do with how people view the causes of their own behavior and the outcomes of their own behavior. So, for example, suppose I go out and I have a final exam the next day, and I don't study much because I've always done well, and I think, oh, I'm going to be fine. And I come in the next day and I fail the exam. So, a lot of the mindset that students have, they're thinking about the causes for the failure. And attributions are the learner's perceived causes of the outcome of getting an F on that exam. They say, why did I get this? And they base this reasoning on various factors, including ability, effort, the task itself, luck, emotions, behavior, and other things that are sometimes outside of their own control. Now, most students have what's called one of two types of what's called locus of control. A locus of control is an individual's set of beliefs about who or what controls their destiny. Students may have an internal locus of control, in which case they believe the causes and the outcomes are under their own control. So, for example, in my exam example, if I say, you know what, I could have studied more, I could have controlled that. I didn't do well because I didn't study. Then I would be exhibiting an internal locus of control because not studying is under my own internal control. However, if I were to say, oh, I got an F because that teacher hates me, or I was just unlucky, then I would be exhibiting an external locus of control, a belief that things are just dependent on things outside of my control. And that's very frustrating to have a set of beliefs like that, if you think about it, because then you go through life believing you can never control anything. So, of course, we want to encourage students to have a locus, an internal locus of control. That is to attribute their successes and failures to their own effort. And so, what can we do to encourage that? So, we focus on effort. We talk about, did you study? What was the outcome of that final that you did study on? Look, you were able to do this. You link low achievement to low effort, not low ability. You don't say you're just no good at math. I hope you would never say that to a student. You'd say perhaps you need to put in more time. You've made this much progress. I know if you put in a little more time, you can make more. Create an environment that rewards effort and not competitive ability. Another learning theory is called goal theory. And this has to do with something we talked about before, which is performance goals and mastery goals. So students have this idea about intelligence or ability, and they plug themselves. You hear them say, oh, I'm not a good reader, or it takes me a long time to read, or I'm not a good math student, or I hate science because I don't understand any of it, and I'm not good in it. Or they might say, I'm not as smart IQ as other students. And so they believe that their abilities and intelligences are fixed rather than that they change over time. So they are either exhibit a performance goal orientation in which they're motivated by factors apart from learning, kind of like the extrinsic rewards idea. And these could be rewards or these could be good grades. So if I am motivated by good grades and I'm constantly comparing my grades to others, I'm doing fine as long as I'm getting A's or maybe even B's. But if I dip to a C, I tend to give up and I tend to say I'm just not good at that. And that's a performance goal orientation. I have to constantly perform to keep my motivation up. But if students are able to develop a mastery goal orientation, then they are motivated not by extrinsic comparisons or grades or comparisons to others or rewards. They're motivated by progress. that they make in their own learning. And they tend to be able to look back and say, I've come a long way. And now I want to finish it. I want to master this goal. These students tend to be the one to not give up. They're motivated to persevere. So what are the instructional implications of goal theory? Well, we can create collaborative learning opportunities that focus on the success of the group. And this tends to remove the pressure from individual competition for grades and things in the class. We can provide specific feedback, as we've discussed before in class, that is focused on progress towards learning and not on the learner. And we can help students set learning goals that are accomplishable, and we can focus on their progress towards that goal. So here are some general strategies to remember. There's a lot in this lecture, so help students find personal meaning and value in the material. Make students active participants in learning. Ask students to analyze what makes their classes more or less motivating. And that would, if you actually ask them this question at the beginning of there, you may be surprised at some of the things that they'll tell you. It's a great exit ticket on the first couple of days of class. Incorporate instructional behaviors that motivate students. So hold high but realistic expectations for your students. Help students set achievable goals for themselves. Tell students what they need to do to succeed in your course, and be enthusiastic about your subject. Structure the course to motivate students. So know what their strengths and interests are and allow them choice at times. Vary your teaching methods so you don't always use the same thing. That tends to keep students motivated and interested. Connect learning with their own needs to make it meaningful. De-emphasize grades, so emphasize mastery and learning rather than grades. Avoid using grades as threats and focus on effort, not ability. Motivate students by responding to their work. So give them feedback as quickly as possible and make it meaningful. Reward success and effort, and be specific when giving negative feedback on what they can do to improve. Feedback needs to be credible and based on latest efforts and achievement. And finally, create a learning environment by helping students to set learning goals. Don't stress getting tasks done, rather stress learning happening during the task. Point out learning, for example, when they're doing a task, when they're doing something well, point out how far they're progressing. And finally, use collaboration and social motivation to motivate. That's it for this week. I hope everybody has a great week.